She is seductive. She is passionate. She is Christine, a 1958 Plymouth Fury with a taste for blood. Nothing you can do can stop her, because how do you kill something that can't possibly be alive? Christine, body by Plymouth, soul by Satan, rated R. Watch out for her soon at a theater near you.
Hey everyone, welcome back to The Pod and the Pendulum, your horror movie podcast that covers every single horror movie franchise, one movie and one episode at a time. I'm your host, Mike Snoonian, joined once again by my co-host, Jerry Smith. Jerry, how are we doing tonight?
I am doing so well.
We are recording right before the 4th of July, which is going to be pretty sweet, nice little long weekend. And because of the long weekend and the holiday, the folks that we had planned on recording with tonight were not able to join us. And we had a decision to make. We originally were going to do a little mini episode with another person who thought it was next week. And we're like, well, we could either A, record on our own the same movie, but we were really excited about the guests we have. B, not record, or C, we were like, let's just do a one-off. So we threw a little poll out there on Twitter. Jerry had the great idea of let's do something by John Carpenter. So we're going to do one of John Carpenter's one-off movies. And Jerry, do you want to let them know what won?
Yeah, we posted 4 different choices, and it was interesting to have so many people vote. And it seemed like it was the battle of either Christine or Prince of Darkness. I seriously thought that people were going to get into fisticuffs about it. And I would have been excited about either one. I mean, Prince of Darkness is my second favorite Carpenter. Mm-hmm. It's my second favorite Carpenter movie ever. But the winner was Christine, which is another movie that actually has very special meaning to me as a kid that grew up reading Stephen King novels. So I am so excited to do this episode.
So let's jump right in because we have a limited amount of time tonight. And it's funny because I think you and I are the same. I think I read my first Stephen King book when I was 8 or 9 years old. Our public library it gave no shits and let me check out Cujo when I was about 8 or 9. And I think I've read everything from his 70s and 80s output except for Christine.
Really? That's crazy.
Yeah,
For me,
I know.
I came across Stephen King as a kid. I mean, 4th grade. My dad took me to the equivalent of what was kind of the 99-cent store back in the 80s, and I found a hardback of Eyes of the Dragon, which is an early Stephen King novel, not very popular. And I think I read it in 2 days as a 4th grader, and he just became my favorite author. And that's all I wanted. I had 0 friends growing up, so I would just, Dad, take me to the bookstore, and I'd get every Stephen King one, bring it to 4th grade, distribute it all throughout the kids. I got sent to the principal's office for doing kids Stephen King novels. I did 3 book reports just on it that same year. I read it 3 times in 4th grade, which is, anyone that's read it, that's not a short book.
No.
And Christine was one of the first ones I read, and I identified with the character of Arnie so much. And I think most people that got into horror, at some point in their lives, probably did identify with Arnie. He's the outcast. He's a lot of us. And unfortunately there are people that once they get popularity and once they get a lot of things, they kind of lose touch of what made them special about being an outcast. I love Christine.
Yeah, I watched it today for the first time, John Carpenter's Christine. I had seen bits and pieces of it, and I kind of had a feeling all right, I think the poll's going to go this way. So I started my watch a little bit early, and I was blown away with how fantastic this movie was. I had never seen it.
What's crazy about that? It is such a fantastic movie too.
It really is,
and it doesn't get talked about when it comes to Carpenter's kind of filmography as much as, the Halloweens, the Things, and all that stuff. But what's interesting is Carpenter only took this movie as a job.
Yep,
because
that's the quote.
Yeah, I mean, it's like well known. He was not passionate about this movie. He wanted to make Firestarter, and what's even crazier, he wanted to make The Ninja. Have you read the novel of The Ninja?
I've never read the novel.
Oh my God, man! The Ninja is this book. I mean, I read it so many times just because I was super into Japanese culture growing up too. Mm-hmm. It's basically about this guy who's raised by this kind of British, British Asian family. He gets into martial arts and kind of the way of the ninja, and he exceeds at it. He's so good, and he's such a good person. And his cousin is the opposite, and they get this long feud. It's like the yin and yang, and it's one of the most epic books around. And that's what Carpenter wanted to do, and that just fell through so many times. He needed a job, so he's like, you know what? Okay, Christine. And it's interesting that he kind of looked down at it at the time, but it turned out, in my opinion, one of his best movies.
Well, it's funny because it doesn't have a lot of those Carpenter flourishes until the back half of the movie. And what it is before that is a really capable, really moving and engaging kind of coming of age story.
Oh, very much so.
So it's really interesting to see Carpenter kind of especially coming off The Thing. And that's why he took this movie. He's very upfront. Like you said, The Thing did so poorly at the box office and critically. He's like, I need a hit. I need work right now. He wanted to get, and good for him. A lot of people might have kind of crawled under a rock or taken some time off. He kind of got right back out there and said, what's just lined up another work at that point to start on.
What's interesting about that is the John Carpenter that did Christine, at that point of his career, I mean, people liked him. His movies weren't doing exceptionally well as far as, The Thing and stuff, but he was, people knew him, but he wasn't the John Carpenter that he is now.
Right.
I mean, these days, the war didn't do so well, so John Carpenter basically says, fuck it, and he wants to play basketball and play video games, But back in the 80s, like you said, he needed a hit. He needed something to keep directing and stuff. And I'm so glad that he chose Christine, because like I said, I mean, it's brilliant. And like you just said, it is such a good coming of age movie. And it only gets in that kind of super Carpenter, John Carpenter, Alan Howard kind of score heavy vibe towards, the second half of it.
Right. In that second half, you see those flares. You see the Panaglide camera that he used for Halloween gets brought out in full force, and Christine very much becomes another take on Michael Myers in the second half, this very steady, unyielding presence that's going to be just unrelenting and not give up when it has its eyes locked on something, and it becomes genuinely scary for some of the bits overall. I really loved it.
Oh, totally. And one thing that I've always loved about the movie is a lot of people just kind of see it for, what it is on the surface. But Christine, to me, I think it's layered in ways that I think maybe sometimes people don't read into as much. Arnie's attraction to the car isn't so much that he just wants to, I want a cool, badass car. It's that Arnie, the character of Arnie, he doesn't identify with anyone. I mean, his parents hate him. He hates his parents. His only friend is basically somebody that's really popular. So he even doesn't feel that close to his best friend because they're not the same kind of person. And the only person that he feels close to is that car. It's like his girlfriend.
It is. And it's part of that is that pride from he took, he says when he buys Christine, he's like, well, I think it's the only thing I've ever seen that's uglier than I am. But then he builds that thing back up from scratch and he gets it going. And there's that pride in your craftsmanship and in your work, in what you've done and what you've been able to do with your own hands at that point. And when others don't appreciate that or want to take it away from you, you can understand why Arnie would kind of dig in his heels at that point and say, no, this is mine. This is a part of me at this point. And what you're saying is when you're rejecting Christine, you're actually rejecting who I am. And it was Arnie for the first time figuring out, he figured out who he was. And as soon as he showed that person, he was rejected.
That and every time I watch Christine, and I might be the only person to have ever said this, if I'm not, then props to whoever else did. But what Christine always reminds me of is Charles Bukowski, because there's that famous quote, find what you love and let it kill you.
Yes.
And I think of it every single time that I watch Christine, because how many of us get so invested in something and we put so much of ourselves in it that, years down the road, maybe we lose touch with what made us love that thing, and we kind of lose touch of ourselves. And I think Christine's a good way to show that. And I think, not just Carpenter's direction, which is brilliant, and the score that he did of Alan Howard, I think his choice in casting is just astonishing. Keith Gordon, I watched Jaws 2 last night because, I just love that movie. But Keith Gordon, I think, is one of the most underrated actors around. Like, he is so good in everything that he did before becoming, a really exceptional director.
Yeah, he was really perfectly cast in this movie. And he would go on to direct. I think the other thing I really recognize him from, too, is Back to School with Rodney Dangerfield, where he plays the son there.
Yeah, Back to School, Jaws 2, The Legend of Billie Jean, which is a really fun movie. A Dress to Kill. God, that Brian De Palma movie, he's so good in that, too.
So it's funny you mentioned De Palma. Because we're talking about Stephen King, and I know we're in the middle of a Stephen King renaissance right now. And there was a long stretch of time where it's like new Stephen King adaptation, and you're like, oh, this is going to be terrible. How are you going to ruin this work? But when you look at his early movies and you look at who was making, you have John Carpenter making Christine, David Cronenberg making The Dead Zone, De Palma making Carrie, Tobe Hooper making Salem's Lot as a miniseries, and Stanley fucking Kubrick making The Shining. You have a half dozen of some of the greatest directors in genre film or just film period, all clamoring for this work. It's just incredible to look back at who was adapting these films.
Well, what's interesting to me, and I don't mean this as an insult whatsoever, because I'm actually a really big fan of Mick Garris. But for the longest time, as a teenager and early adult, every time a Stephen King adaptation was announced, I'd be like, okay, what book is Mick Garris adapting this month? It was every TV movie was Mick Garris doing this. And then what I think, in my opinion, led to this great Stephen King renaissance is how passionate Frank Darabont was. Frank Darabont, The Green Mile, Shawshank Redemption, The Mist, these are quality. And I'm not saying Mick Garris's films aren't quality. I just mean as far as big theatrical movies. These were movies that could have been nominated for Oscars,
Yeah, and Garris was very limited by scope.
Yes.
You have at that time when Garris is making these movies, you're not shooting in widescreen, you're shooting in pan and scan for television at that point. You're limited by budget, and you're limited in the story beats you can do because every 12 minutes you have to hit a commercial break.
Yeah.
So whatever pacing you want to do at that point is going to immediately get thrown off. So, I think he did with the work he did, and even his adaptation of The Shining, which I'm sure we're going to cover at some point when we do The Shining, and Doctor Sleep. I know at some point.
All right.
I'm sure we're going to get to that at some point. But let's talk.
Before we get into it, I feel like this episode, any mention of Stephen King, our listeners are going to hear both of us just giggle like little kids.
Well, it's hard not to. It's definitely if you're a horror fan, you love Stephen King.
And Christine, you get a Stephen King book adapted by John fucking Carpenter. How could you not just be ecstatic even talking about it? I'm smiling and turning red talking about this movie right now.
So let's talk about let's talk about Dennis a little bit. What struck me when I'm watching this movie, and I don't know if anyone's ever brought this out, I kind of felt like Dennis was maybe into Arnie, maybe had a crush on him, maybe was struggling with his own sexuality a bit, because Dennis is supposed to be your most popular kid in school, top jock in school. He's portrayed as very sensitive. He completely ignores the young woman who is lusting after him earlier in the film, and there's that moment when he approaches Lee in the library, and this other girl looks up, thinks he's coming for her, and when she realizes he's going to walk by him, she gets this look on her face oh God, she's embarrassed. But the affection that Arnie shows for, that Dennis shows for Arnie seems to go above and beyond just like a good friend type of relationship.
Well, there are two different, like, I think, approaches that you could kind of get on board with. The first one is maybe, I mean, we've all been in that situation. I know I have, where there are kids at school that nobody likes, and you almost feel protective over them. You know what I mean? Like, I remember in 5th grade, there was this really sweet girl that came to my school, and she had cerebral palsy. And there wasn't I don't remember her name because it's been so long, but there was nobody that wanted to hang out with this girl. They would make fun of her for the way she walked and everything. And I felt like it was my job, not like it was my duty to be her friend. I wanted to be her friend, but I also felt like it was my job to kind of be protective. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And there's that, but at the same time, like, I also agree with you 100%. Dennis is the one. I mean, more than Alexander Paul's character, Dennis. The character of Dennis is the one so defeated by Arnie kind of transforming into this really negative person. Mm-hmm. He's the one that's heartbroken. You know, she's just getting dissed by another guy that ends up being a douchebag. Whereas Dennis, I mean, he goes to visit, or Arnie comes to visit in the hospital, you know, and Arnie just kind of like has like a whatever attitude. And if you look, Dennis is just so broken by the fact that Arnie just kind of doesn't care. Like, I think, like, I agree with you 100%. And I think that might have been something that is more prevalent in the Carpenter film, because the book, I mean, the character of Dennis and Lee, they end up together for a while, and they end up splitting up, like, you know, years down the road and stuff. And they don't really get into that. But, yeah, I mean, I think that subtext is definitely there.
Yeah, it's something that really sprung out because Dennis is like in the kitchen having a powwow with Arnie's parents when he buys the car. Like there's just such genuine concern there, and it goes above and beyond just kind of having your friends back at that point. And like you said, when Arnie goes to visit him in those 2 hospital scenes, like it's almost like when you're a little kid and you get dragged to see like some aunt that on your mom's side of the family twice removed, and you like have to go visit her and like eat, you know, like the paper button candy and hard candy from a dish, and you're like, I don't want to be here right now. Like that's the look that Arnie has when he's in those hospital seats. Like he could give no shits for his friend anymore.
Well, Arnie just talks about himself the entire time. Mm-hmm. And the scene that you mentioned where Dennis is talking to Arnie's parents, what it reminded me of, I'm really close with my wife's family. And anytime that I'm hanging out with her dad or, you know, talking about music or something with her dad, he's always like voicing his frustrations with my wife to me, you know? And that's what that scene reminded me of, you know, like almost like they were confiding in, you know, like Arnie's partner more than his friend.
Yeah. And like the mom, like, you know, when he's like, well, I tried not to. Well, did you really try? And it's like, Mom, like, it's not Dennis's responsibility to raise your son.
He just wants to throw footballs.
Yeah. So like the parents in this movie, like one thing that really jumped out at me, the scene where basically Arnie tells his mother to fuck off and like leaves, and the dad puts his hands to him and Arnie hits him back. I took that, it was like that was not the first time that Arnie's dad had ever like tried to hit him.
Oh, no, totally. I get that impression as well. And it's been so long since I've read the book. I probably a good 20, 25 years. But I don't remember if that's in the book, kind of, you know, backstory to that. But very much so. I feel like that's why the dad's so shocked when Arnie steps back up to him, because this is a different Arnie. It's a different Arnie than what we saw at the very beginning. And there was that kind of fractured relationship at the beginning. But by the time that Arnie steps up to him, there's such a level of genuine shock. Kind of like that dad was, and that dad was kind of the alpha male of the situation. The mom's kind of the bashful one that just takes whatever the boys are going to do, you know, because that's what a good wife does, which I'm obviously being sarcastic.
Yes.
You know, I think that too. I think it's the moment where the dad's like, holy shit, I've lost power now. I'm not the alpha male anymore.
And I think one of the most shocking things when I was watching this movie was for that first act, almost those first 2 acts of the movie, Arnie is such a sweet kid. Like you really feel for him, you really like him. I think the performance, it's just so genuine and so wonderful by Keith Gordon that And I kind of like that you didn't see this gradual decline in Arnie. You basically see him from the moment he gets the car up and running, he's a
Yeah.
dick. And it's so shocking.
Well, he becomes. What's crazy is I rewatched it a couple of weeks ago with my kids because my kids are like huge fans of the movie in general. And there was that new Steelbook that came out at Best Buy, so obviously I had to go get it.
There's a new what now?
A new Steelbook release, a Blu-ray release of Christine.
Oh, okay.
Like a new 4K. Yeah, it just looks great. So I wanted to show it to my kids. And they even pointed it out that like by the end of the movie, Arnie is just as bad as the bullies messing with him.
Yeah.
Like it's a weird comparison, but it's kind of like Breaking Bad in the sense that the Breaking Bad started out with a protagonist who by the end of the show became the show's antagonist. He became a villain. And that's what Arnie does throughout this movie. And it's not gradual. It's the moment he finds that kindred spirit in Christine that he's just like, you know what? Fuck everybody.
Right.
And it's very fast. Like you said, it's not this gradual thing.
Right. And he even says to Dennis in that scene when he's racing down the highway, like, find someone that's going to love you, find someone that's going to, like, trust you and put their faith in you. And Dennis is like, oh, that's how you feel about Lee? He's like, no, that's how I feel about Christine, my car. Like, nobody else matters to Arnie at that point. And I thought that was really telling that he was that ostracized from other people, even the people that, cared about him.
What makes the film so great is in the book it was different. In the book, the car was possessed by the spirit of a killer kind of thing. Like it goes into the backstory and this stuff. In the movie, it's very much just the car just does it on its own. It just comes to life. It doesn't give explanation. So while on the surface the car is doing these things because of the car's love for Arnie, but I never saw it that way. I saw it as the car is an extension of what Arnie wants. I feel like Arnie is the one who's doing the stuff through the car. I don't blame it on the car. I blame it on Arnie and his desire to get back at every single person, even Dennis. Arnie is so, in my opinion, he resents the fact that Dennis is popular. He resents the fact, and he thinks, and like I said, this is just my opinion, but I think Arnie feels angry that in his opinion, Dennis is his friend because he feels sorry for him, even if that's not the case.
Yeah, I think there's points where Dennis or Arnie, you can see him look at Dennis and say, come on, you're being my friend out of pity. It's not that you really like me at this point. And that's why, like, when Arnie starts to get more popular, he starts to blow Dennis off, almost like he's relieving Dennis of his duty to be his friend at that point. Like, he never fully trusts that Dennis wants to be his friend.
Well, that's why Arnie is so just like full of just bragging once he gets kind of more arrogant and Christine and stuff. He almost rubs it in Dennis's face that Lee likes him. He rubs it in his face that, he could take care of himself now. Almost like he's getting satisfaction from making Dennis feel like the one who's a loser.
Well, and you know what? Even though he's doing that, like, that's his insecurities are still there the whole time.
Yeah.
They never go away. And one scene I want to talk about is the drive-in scene and the Heimlich maneuver. Because I don't think it's any accident. Like, that scene is shot very sexual, where the gentleman who's giving Lee the Heimlich maneuver is pressed up against her. They're both panting. At the end of the scene, like, she's pressed right up against him. They're breathing very heavy. His hands are almost running up her sides under her breasts at that point. It's one of those things where when you see that, like, and meanwhile, Arnie has just been rejected sexually by Lee. He doesn't want to thank this person. He thinks that he's stealing his girlfriend, even though it's very clear that something is wrong in that moment.
He's choking.
Because he's choking to death, basically. And he can't admit that. He's like, I'm being bested by another man again. Even though I have this new car, this new popularity, this new girlfriend, I'm still not good enough. I'm still less than overall. And I think it was very intentional to kind of shoot that moment, like, that overtly sexual. And Carpenter's not someone that usually is a very sexual filmmaker. Like his stuff doesn't have a lot of that in it. So that's what really struck me.
That's also I've always thought that scene in particular it's always been the point of no return for Arnie.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like after he's rejected by Lee and he sees that man helping Lee, but in his eyes, kind of that guy's doing what he wanted to do, which is really weird for Arnie. I think that's the point where he just snaps. It's like, you know what, I'm done. Like these people are gonna go.
Yeah, and he's very like through the rest of the film, like he wants to be with. He says he wants to be with Lee, but he pushes her away at every single moment. He becomes really abusive towards her. There's that.
Oh yeah.
There's that scene in the garage when he sees Christine has been totaled, but even after that, when he calls her on the phone and she doesn't answer him right away the way he wants, he starts hurling expletives at her. It's uncomfortable.
Well, the scene where he finds Christine totaled, I mean, man, that for me, even growing up as a kid, that made me so uncomfortable because it's like, what? I thought this was the film's lead hero. Like, why is he treating this girl? Like, I mean, he treats her like she's this absolute excrement in that scene. And it's like, even as a child, like watching this movie, I felt really weird. Like it was hard for me to sympathize for Arnie even for a single second after that scene.
Right. He really does become like the antagonist of the movie from that point on, and your perspective starts to shift on him overall. What do we think of the bullies in this movie?
It's funny that you say that. I do have some opinions on the bullies. Carpenter's great with casting, but I will say, and I know everyone involved with Pod and the Pendulum and our listeners know that we love Stu Charno.
Mm-hmm.
But casting Stu Charno as a bully, like that is the biggest, like, what the fuck piece of casting I've like Stu Charno as a bully?
Right.
Like that guy should have been Arnie,
Yeah.
That and I mean, William Ostrander plays Buddy Repperton. Like, man, that guy looks like he's 50 in that movie.
He does.
And he's playing like a 16-year-old, 17-year-old?
Yeah. He looks like if John Travolta today went back to play Barbarino in a Welcome Back, Kotter reboot, if Travolta did that today, that's what Will Ostrander would have looked like that's what he looked like in Christine. It's pretty ridiculous.
So yeah, the character of Buddy Repperton, I mean, he looks like the Walmart version of John Travolta.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny to watch because also, I mean, the way that these teenagers talk to adults in this movie like baffles me. Like, I mean, I grew up in the the 80s, and obviously we weren't allowed to be beat by our teachers. But I mean, there's a moment when I was in the 4th or 5th grade where this bully who was kind of like the Buddy Repperton stepped up to my teacher, and my teacher threw him across the desk, and still had his job. Like you watch Christine, and these kids, I mean, they're pulling knives, they're hitting things, they're cussing out their teachers, they're cussing out their parents. Like I want to know what universe that these kids are from.
Yeah, they're just like they're all in the adults business at that point. They don't give, like Arnie with Harry Dean Stanton's character with the cop. He's like totally mouthing off to the cop after he knows this kid has been murdered, and he's like treats it like it's no big deal, like you got nothing on me, copper.
Dude, I am the most like vanilla boring person around. Like, I don't have a criminal record. I've never been arrested. But with that being said, if a cop ever questions me about anything, even if it's, hey, did you see this dog cross the road illegally or something, I go into instant panic. The idea that Arnie would just like tell a cop, like basically step up to a cop and just be a complete dick. It's like, it's weird to me. Especially, I mean, Harry Dean Stanton. I mean, that guy's like the epitome of cool.
Yeah. Yeah, and I just love how just nonchalant he is and how that gets under Arnie's skin so easily. It's like a perfect little role for him.
Also, I mean, what I love about not just the bullies, but kind of like the main cast, Arnie, Keith Gordon, John Stockwell, all these people, is a lot of them went on to be great directors in their own right. I mean, like we said, Keith Gordon went on to direct. I mean, he directed some of my favorite episodes of Dexter. He's directed episodes of Legion. He did a really great film called Waking the Dead that I highly recommend if anyone hasn't seen it. John Stockwell, that plays Dennis, he went on to direct some really cool action movies. And he directed Turistas, which, I mean, I'm not a fan of it, but I mean, that's cool,
Mm-hmm.
But John Stockwell went on to direct this movie, I think it's called In the Blood, at Gina Carano, and it's a really fun action movie. But a lot of the people from this cast went on to be, very successful, in other fields themselves.
But when you look at the John Carpenter, when people who watch football, you often hear something called the coaching tree, where you have like a really good coach, and then all his assistants kind of go off and become coaches for their own teams. When you look at the John Carpenter directing tree overall, like people that have worked with Carpenter, what they've gone on to do. You have like Tommy Lee Wallace, who went on to have like a really good career after working with him overall. Nick Castle doing The Last Starfighter. He worked with a lot of people who moved on to like bigger and better things with their career, and part of that is Carpenter being really smart in surrounding himself with really. I mean, look at Dean Cundley shooting Jurassic Park. Right. I mean, end of story right there.
And Camp Rock. He shot Camp Rock.
So it's just, how can we forget? But it's just like, it's a matter of like Carpenter, being smart enough to surround himself with very talented people, but also like passing things on, through teaching.
I mean, another cool thing about the casting of Christine, you get to see actors in roles that we don't typically know them for. Mm-hmm. I mean, Robert Foskey, is so mean in that movie. So cruel and just absolutely mean in that film. But like, at the time seeing it as a kid, I was like, oh, I believe that guy. But now, years later, I know him from like, Miracle on 34th Street, Home Alone, all these Last Action Hero, Mrs. Doubtfire, So it's fun to go back and watch Christine and see these actors that you wouldn't typically know, for being these really hard, abrasive characters, being that way.
But that meanness is totally believable. And as you find out his backstory, you can see where it's come from and you can almost justify it. And, I just love that little moment when he's with Dennis and he's like, you don't really know your friend nearly as well as you think you do. Like Parnell basically lines up Dennis from within 30 seconds of laying eyes on him. And it's like, yep. Has that person completely figured out at that point. He has that. He has, Arnie completely figured out from the moment that he lays eyes on him.
Oh, definitely.
So what do we think? Like, one of the things I was doing a little bit of reading ahead of time on this is the studios wanted a hard R on this movie. They wanted it, which is really funny nowadays when you think like how many movies are cut to get a PG-13 rating.
Yeah.
The studio's like, fuck that. We want give us go nuts, John. We know you can do it. And Carpenter said like, man, after doing The Thing, I wanted to get away from doing like really a lot of blood and a lot of guts. Yeah. But I got to do an R rating. I'm just going to have these kids curse up a storm. That's how we got around that.
Yeah, definitely. Because the death scenes themselves really aren't that, they're not that gory. It's more like what you don't see. Mm-hmm. Like there's that scene, I forget the character's name, but one of the bullies, when Christine kind of traps him in that little alley. And that little cubby thing and just smashes them. We don't see a lot of stuff there. We don't see a lot of stuff in general. I mean, I think the most violent death in Christine is Arnie flying out the window and being kind of held on a little bit of glass.
Yeah.
But I think most of it is in that profanity, which is interesting. It's interesting. Like, we want a hard R. Okay, I'm going to add the F word about 35 times.
35 times. Yeah.
That's
and there's no nudity in the movie at all. And again, it's up for the whole movie, Arnie and Dennis, they're like, we got to get laid. I just want to go out and have sex with somebody. And there's barely even a whiff of it in this movie. The most horny scene in the movie is the Heimlich maneuver scene.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's not a very vulgar film in general. No. Like you said, it's mostly the profanity. But another thing that I feel that I just really like about the film is the transformation of Arnie. Like you
Mm-hmm.
said, it's not gradual, but at the same time, I mean, he starts off like a very sweet, character, and by the end, he's very ghoulish. I mean, his eyes are dark, and sunken in, and it's almost like he's. I mean, obviously he is, but it's almost like he's not human by the end.
Mm-hmm.
He seems like dead, and dead in the eyes, and it's really interesting that where at the beginning of the film, Christine is kind of an extension of Arnie, but by the end, it's twisted. I think Arnie is an extension of Christine by the end, and I've always loved that touch about the film.
Absolutely. I definitely agree with that. The only time you see flashes of what Arnie is going to become is that first argument with his mom in the kitchen where he puts his foot down for the first time and says, like, no, this is mine. I never ask for anything. This, I'm putting my foot down. And in that moment, you're cheering for Arnie. You're like, yeah, absolutely, dude. Like, you've earned this. Like, you absolutely should not put up with any shit right now. But then you see how quickly he stops being able to see anyone's point of view aside from his own, and it becomes it becomes frightening at that point.
Yeah, for sure. Another thing, like, what's crazy is one of the most iconic scenes in the entire film was kind of like an afterthought, and it's interesting how that works in films, where that whole, like, the rebuilding of Christine, when she kind of like pops herself back together, that was an afterthought.
Yep.
It's been well documented that, Carpenter wanted a little bit more after it was over. He didn't feel it was that scary, so he wanted these little touches that were added. And it's so cool that he thought of that because, I mean, nowadays, it's not that impressive by today's standards. I mean, anyone could do that. But back then, you watch that scene and it's magical to watch. It is brilliant.
Well, I think too, what I appreciate is that there is this real tactile feel to it. Like you're seeing a real object transform itself, and it's very impressive to watch. It's almost like, and it's funny because the reason they went with Christine just being her own spirit and not the serial killer is Carpenter saying, well, this was already done in American Werewolf in London, where like a dead person follows around their buddy. We don't want to mimic that again. But I looked at this transformation scene in Christine almost like an American Werewolf in London's werewolf transformation scene. It's just really impressive to watch. And you're right, it was added after the initial shooting was done. It definitely adds a whole other layer to the movie, and that makes the car at that point, it does make it scary because you're like, shit.
That, and it's very sexual, like you said earlier. Arnie's love for the car, I think, it's not a platonic love. Mm-hmm. Like, Arnie is turned on by Christine hardcore. Mm-hmm. I mean, from the way he touches the car to, just even his delivery, the show me thing. Mm-hmm. Like, that car is, that's his sexual desire. And it's really interesting to me to see that in a Carpenter film.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because Carpenter's work, especially coming off the Thing where it's all men, his work is not very sexual overall. Mm-hmm. It's very when there is sex in it, it's usually very perfunctory. It's basically Tom Atkins picking up Jamie Lee Curtis on the side of the road for a quick roll in the hay 10 minutes after they meet. That type of deal overall. So
asking each other if they're weird.
Yes.
That, or like Vampires was another one that was like, I mean, we were watching that in the theaters and I was just like, whoa, this is kind of kinky. This is interesting. Mm-hmm. Like, I didn't expect this from Carpenter.
Yeah. It's another one shocking when it happens.
Oh. Yeah.
What do we think of the opening? Like, what were your impressions of the opening moments of the film with Christine coming off the conveyor belt?
I get so excited at that because, that's music. Oh, God. Mm. It fits it so well. And it's almost boring on purpose.
Yeah.
It's just like, all right, they're putting together a car. And in one little snap of the fingers, like, all hell breaks loose.
Yeah. Because you see it coming. It coming, and then it happened. It's great. So when I watched that opening scene, what struck me, especially knowing that this was right after he did the Thing, is you have this, like, assembly line of all these cars that look the same. Like, just this product that's coming out. And then you have this one car that stands out from all the rest at that point. And to me, that's what Carpenter was kind of giving a middle finger at that point to Hollywood. Like, all right, here's your assembly line, all the same shit. You know, now you have my stuff, and my stuff is going to be dangerous. My stuff is going to like break your fingers if you're not paying attention to what you're doing. And I really kind of that, I know maybe I'm reading too much into it, but
I don't think you are, because what is above every single film that John Carpenter's ever directed, with the exception of Memoirs of Invisible Men? John Carpenter's. You know? Like, it's definitely a level of arrogance, but at the same time, John Carpenter, whether or not people give him credit for being so, is definitely an auteur.
Yes.
You know, he makes his films the way he wants it. And you see a John Carpenter movie, you know it's a John Carpenter movie.
Yeah.
And I agree with you 100%. Yeah. This is an FU to the studios, you know, that is churning out just like product after product.
Even when he is doing something for just a job, he still brings his own imprint to the work overall. You know, it still has his flourishes.
Even his work that, isn't as big as the other ones. I mean, his Cigarette Burns episode of Masters of Horror is, God, it's one of the best hours of television I've ever seen. I mean, I can't stand, like, how much you just detest Mandy is how I feel about Norman Reedus. Not a fan. But I can watch Cigarette Burns, not as a person. I don't know him, but his film. I mean, I can watch Cigarette Burns 24/7. I love that one.
Yeah, I haven't watched that one in years, and I think I'm due for a rewatch at all the Masters of Horror, because I remember really enjoying that one.
Oh, they're great. They're great, and it's cool that they're kind of continuing on with the Nightmare Cinema.
Yeah.
See, I was nervous about showing my kids Christine the first time, just because how defiant Arnie is with his parents.
Yeah.
Like, I was so scared that, you know, I would show my son Dexter that, and then, like, I'd come home and go like, "Fuck you, Dad!" Like, you know, I was terrified of that.
Well, it's like, but you could be like, well, look what happened at the end. He got thrown through a windshield.
You know what? I'm going to throw you through a windshield, kid.
This is what happens when you talk back to your parents. So
you get possessed by your car.
I remember, this is a side note right here. I remember I was watching Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and like I would not let my daughter watch that quite yet. But during the scene where like Franklin gets gutted, I'm like, "Come here, I want to show you something." I'm like, "This is what happens when you don't eat your vegetables," I think is the quote.
That is great. Yeah, you know what's funny is I show, like, my kids actually love that movie, and I don't know why I showed it to them already, because my kids are 9 and 10, but they've seen it for at least a few years by now. But even as super small kids, when I showed them the first time, like, their first thing was like, "That's cool. I mean, Franklin wasn't that great anyways." And that was their childish way of saying, now he was an annoying little bastard.
Yeah, there you go. What do you think of the end of Christine, when the car is crushed, it's into a little cube, and then like the oldies music starts playing and it's just a guy?
What I think it is, and I have a love-hate relationship with these kind of endings. I love them because it's like, oh, that's great, this little wink, wink to the audience. But at the same time, I also like my stories tied up. You know, it worked for Halloween because I'm 38 now, and I've still not recovered from the first time I saw Halloween, and Michael was there when they took over the thing. It works for those films, but I kind of wish that they wouldn't have had that little tweak at the end, because I feel like it was such a good arc of showing somebody get destroyed by what they were obsessed with, and just to have like a, Arnie's defeated and Christine's still ticking. Like I feel like it's kind of a slap to the face of its audience, but at the same time, I mean, I do love the film, and I understand why it's there.
Yeah, and it's just a very subtle thing, and I think you could read it either way. It could be a breeze kind of had it move just a little bit. I just loved it, the fact that like they hear this music playing and they get really freaked out, and then it's just some schmuck with a boombox walking by. Because I think by that point you've expected the Carrie ending, you expected the Friday the 13th ending, and instead you just get a guy walking around a junkyard with like a 1980s style boombox.
Well, what is great about that scene is I know a lot of people didn't care for it, but I mean, I adored it. The new Pet Cemetery, Starry Eyes guys made. I loved in Pet Cemetery the new one where you think you know what's coming up, especially with the character of Judd. You know, you've seen the first adaptation, you read the book, you know what's going to happen, and it gets you really nervous about that. And then it doesn't happen, and you're like, okay, I could calm down again, and then it happens, and that's what the end of Christine is to me. You know, you're expecting something to happen, and like you said, it's just some dude walking with boombox. So then after you see that, you're like, oh, okay, I'm calming down again, and then you get the little like death rattle kind of thing with Christine. Is it still going? Is it just a breeze?
Just what's don't going know. On? Yeah. And speaking of music, I love the musical selections they use here because they're very coded, they're very deliberate. They cue you into what's going on in that scene, and they're very appropriate for that scene. So I really love the use of the oldies music in there and the specific choices they make with their music in this movie.
Not just the oldies music. I mean, all around, it's just a great soundtrack and score. And it also shows that, I mean, Carpenter knows his music, obviously he knows about composing music, but he also has a love, I think, for music in general, because how could someone front the Coupe de Villes and not love good music, Like, I love the choices in songs in Christine, almost as much as I love the score, from Carpenter and Alan Howard. Like, it adds it's its own character. And just like it is in every Carpenter movie. Every Carpenter movie, the music is its own character.
Yep.
And I think Christine is a great example of that. The score I'm talking about it's its own character, and it's a great example of that. But I almost feel like it's not as recognized or appreciated as, the Halloween, Escape from New York, Assault on Precinct 13 is another one that I just think is one of the best theme songs ever, but you just don't hear people talk about it that much.
Yeah, and I think a big reason for that is where the score actually sits in the movie. It's interesting that this movie doesn't open with a classic Carpenter score.
Yeah.
It's basically very simple titles, and then we go right to that factory, and you're not getting your traditional like Carpenter theme or motif that's going to start. It's really not until Christine becomes sentient that the Carpenter Horowitz score really kicks in, and I wonder if it's more of an issue of like the placement in the film that maybe why this one isn't regarded quite as well. Because I can tell you, as I was watching this movie, I opened up Spotify. I'm like, I need to find this soundtrack.
Oh, dude, I would also recommend, if you don't have it already, the Anthology album that came out a couple years ago. Carpenter, his son Cody, and his godson Daniel Davies re-recorded all of his classic themes a couple years ago for one album. And Christine, oh man, Christine sounds so great now.
Yeah, that's going to be a must-listen to tonight.
Well, and I also feel like a reason maybe the score isn't, I hate to use the word underappreciated, because, I mean, its fans do love it. But maybe not as recognized is because it is bunched in with, I mean, so many great songs. I mean, Bad to the Bone. You get Buddy Holly with Not Fade Away. Little Richard. I mean,
I think Richie Valens is in there.
I think so. I mean, there's also films that like I don't think they're on the soundtrack. I mean, it's been a while since I have the soundtrack, but I don't know where it is. But I mean, don't they have like ABBA and stuff like that on there too? Like,
a little bit.
There's some stuff that like there's so many like real song. When I say real songs, I don't mean the score. Like the actual songs in the film, that the score kind of I feel like does get lost in there sometimes, but it's great.
And not only that, when they're used in the movie, there's usually like it's Christine sending a warning, like basically a warning shot to whoever she's got her sights on at that moment. I think it's a really wonderful touch to the movie, and it adds to the creepiness of it overall. So,
you know what I wonder, and this is kind of a little side question. I haven't read much about Stephen King's inspiration for Christine. I mean, the book, I love it, but I don't know how he got into it. But I'm
pretty sure it's cocaine.
Right? Like that in Maximum Overdrive. But, oh my God, man. No, but James Dean's car was, like, rumored to be possessed. Like, I don't know if you've read that whole, like, mythology thing, but his car, that he called his car Little Bastard, and people said that it was possessed. So I wonder if that was kind of the jumping point for that.
It's
But
possible because Stephen King, like his writing is so, even to this day, like he has such a fetish for 1950s
yes.
culture and for like greaser culture and that whole thing. Like he still writes his like younger characters to this day, like they're 1950s greasers. To his, as much as I love Stephen King, to his detriment sometimes.
Well, I mean, yeah. Sometimes they come back. I mean, so many of those things. It's like, cool, dude, you love pomade. Uh, no, but back to cocaine. No. No, but seriously, there's a script that came out a few years ago, and it was like one of the most just beloved scripts that was being passed around. It's called Maximum King. Have you read that by any chance?
I have not read this.
It is a fictional film. They'll never make it, and I know why because I've read it many times. It's basically a biopic about Stephen King making Maximum Overdrive.
Jesus. Okay, I've heard this.
There is so much cocaine and Emilio Estevez being an idiot in the script that, man, it is any of you listeners, if you could find that script, please read it.
But King does not shy away from that in his life.
I know.
He's so open about it.
What's funny is I have so many things that like I just shield my kids and friends and everything. Like, like, I mean, I did drugs as a kid because I mean, kind of who didn't? Except the straight edge kids. Kids actually.
I was a straight
exactly.
edge
kid. You had ethics.
I just was boring, man. I was just boring.
No, but like I'm such a different person than I was as a teenager, and I try to like act like that wasn't a part of my life. But like Stephen King, you read interviews, he's like, man, I was on coke. It was crazy. It's like, what? Dude, you're Stephen King. But I mean that's probably why he does it. He is Stephen King. He can talk about whatever the hell he wants.
He's always been super open about. All right, I know you need to get out of here in 10 minutes, so let's put a bow on our Christine talk. Where do you want to end with this?
Oh boy, I think that Christine, in my opinion, and I know I've said that a million times because mostly I get tired of people arguing with me online. I think it's one of Carpenter's best films. I think it definitely sits in maybe not the top 5, but maybe top 10 for me. It's great. I think sometimes people forget that it's a Carpenter movie because it's so in tune with Stephen King, mythology and past. And the fact that Carpenter took it as a job and made it his own and made it one of the most exciting, exciting and not brutal in violence or visceral in a visceral way, but emotionally. It is one of Carpenter's best films when it comes to character development. I mean, the casting, Keith Gordon, like I said earlier, one of the most underrated actors around. I think Christine is a brilliant film. And if any of you listeners, if you guys haven't seen it, you're an alien. But if you haven't, go look it up. If you haven't watched it in a while, revisit it.
I was one of those aliens until about 4 o'clock today, and I am so glad this won the poll. I love Prince of Darkness. I voted for They Live, but I mean, really, we could not have gone wrong with any of the 4 choices. But I am actually really glad this won because this was like a wonderful movie to sit down and watch. It had all of the things I love about John Carpenter, but it also showed a whole new side of him that I wasn't aware of him as a director that you don't often get to see. There was this genuine warmth in the characters there that isn't often there. And
have you seen Starman?
I have not seen Starman yet.
Oh my God. When can you watch Starman, Mike?
I'll have to watch it over break.
Please do. If you want a Carpenter film that has character development and sweetness, innocence, like John Carpenter making a film about an alien that wants to be human. Like it's not horror whatsoever. It is a brilliant drama that the warm parts of Christine that you love, you will adore in Starman.
Then that's going to be probably the next Carpenter film I watch in the next week or so. So before we go, Jerry, did you have anything you wanted to announce or talk about? Like you had mentioned you had a few things that you were working on coming up. Is that for public consumption yet, or am I editing this?
There's a big one that I can't speak on right now, but if it happens, I can die. But there's a couple things I can really quickly. I am directing a segment of Tales from the Grave, which is this anthology produced by Dustin Ferguson. Yeah, it's going to be this really cool kind of Brian De Palma homage mixed with witchcraft. It's
Very cool. Okay,
so
I'm in.
much fun. I'm so excited to do it, and we got some really cool people involved. But yeah, that's it for now.
That's very cool. I am excited to see how that comes out. I have nothing going on. No, so I just almost finished school. So I'm very excited. I'm done my last ever class. I have 2 nights of internship left, and then I'm done. And I'm very excited to be done this. So that's what I have going on. Now it's like the job hunt season. Like we're living off the last of my student loans at this point, and we just needed to get us through August. So, all right, to our listeners, we hope you guys enjoyed this. It's a little bit different from what we normally do, but we really didn't want to go a week without having an episode up, and we thought this is a really good way to do it. And I could see us doing more stuff like this in the future, especially with the Patreon. So we'll talk about that at some point. So we'll be back next week with our Friday the 13th, Part 7, A New Blood episode. And Jerry, who's guesting?
Do you want to announce it? Okay, yeah, that's what I was
on that.
Okay, I don't know. We haven't discussed if we're going to do 2 mini episodes or 1 big one, but
one big and 1 mini, I think.
One big, 1 mini. For the mini, we are talking to William Butler, who is in Friday the 13th, Part 7, The New Blood. He was actually the first person that Kane Hodder ever killed as Jason because they shot it out of sequence. Really great staple in the horror genre. I mean, he did Night of the Living Dead, the remake, Texas Chainsaw 3. Great director in his own right. We're going to be talking to him. And for the episode...
Didn't William say, like, I think when I was watching the Leatherface documentary, he said he's the only person to be killed by Freddy, Jason, and Leatherface on film.
Yeah. How nuts was that? Because he was in an episode of Freddy's Nightmares.
Yep.
Yeah, we have William Butler for the mini episode. And for the big episode, I could not be more excited about this. We have Tommy Hudson, who wrote Never Sleep Again, the book. He worked on the documentary. He's a great director, great author. And we have, I think you pronounce his name Brackey? Peter Brackey. Or it could be Brake. I'm sorry, Peter, if I got that wrong. The author of Crystal Lake fucking Memories, which is the definitive Friday the 13th book.
This is the book we use for all our research for this. Yeah.
It is going to be one of the most informative episodes that we've recorded or will ever record. I have a feeling about that. So I'm so excited.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to being like, and let me read from your book, Peter. But I'm really excited for that. After that, we have Brad McCarr coming up for Jason Takes Manhattan. And I think we might have another director lined up for another interview. We'll know more about that very shortly. So we have some really cool things. And once we wrap up Friday the 13th, are we jumping into what, Blair Witch Project?
Yes, we are. So there are three spooky-ass movies. The first Blair Witch, I've seen it only twice in my life because I watched it in 99 and it scared the living shit out of me. Yep. And I only watched it again 2 years ago because I finally got the balls to watch it. So it's going to be fun revisiting. Yeah,
I want to set up a screening for it in the woods near our house. And what is really fun about that, anyone who knows the Bridgewater, Massachusetts area, I live smack dab in the Bridgewater Triangle, where there have been like witch sightings. There actually was like a mass murder near us in the 80s during the Satanic Panic. It was a ritual killing, Bigfoot sightings, ghosts, you name it, and we have it. And I definitely want to watch the Blair Witch Project in October, in the dark, in the woods, and then I guess this show would be over because we.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. Well, then, nice knowing you.
So until next week, follow us on Pod and the Pod and Pendulum over at Twitter. If you are on iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you get your podcast from, leave us a rating. I can't stress enough, like that goes a huge way to people actually finding us. Every time we get a review, we see our numbers jump up for the next couple of days. So, and if you're enjoying the show, please consider leaving us a rating. Until next week, everyone have a great one. I am now going to go pack for my vacation. Jerry, you have a wonderful night, and it's 8:30. We're out on time.
All right.